So first up, we have Fred Illies, who's going to talk to us about user experience design and from FileMaker Go to the web. And then after that, we'll have Charles Delf. He's going to talk to us about FM BetterForms. So with that, I am going to stop sharing. And if Fred, if you could start sharing your screen, we can go ahead and kick the meeting off.
Sure, I will. Let me just share desktop.
So I'm going to mute everybody, but Fred, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Perfect. And are you able to see my screen?
We can.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you very much for having us today, guys. I'm really excited to be chatting with you. As I was mentioning before, Charles and I were actually in LA ready to talk to your last meeting, and we were really bummed out by the fact that that COVID mania happened right around the same time. I remember the day before, I think 2 days before the meeting, maybe, I was chatting with my wife, who was going to be flying from Toronto to meet me in LA. And I said, you know what? Nobody was wearing masks on the plane. Everybody's feeling pretty normal here. And she was kind of worried. She had heard that some things were closing and so forth. And then very next day, the NBA pulled the plug. And then it was just like, you know, everything going down the drain one after the other. So that was unfortunate. But I'm really excited to be here and chatting with you today. And hope to one day be able to attend a meeting in person down there. So without further ado, I'll get started. I want to talk to you today about how to make a killer app. And I'm going to give you an example of an app that I built and that works together with a website, a mobile web app that Charles built in FM BetterForms. And I want to just kind of walk through the story. But first, I want to give you a little bit of context about how to create a killer app. Okay. So for some reason, that is not letting me do this. I'm trying to advance my slides, and for some reason, it's not doing that in full view mode. Give me a second, guys. Can you hear that beep? No. Okay, I am going to stop my share just for a second, okay?
It's the buzz.
See if I can get out of the full, I'm trying to get out of full screen mode. This is the one thing that we didn't test before, guys. Sorry about that.
Escape?
Yeah, I'm trying that. For some reason, it's not taking me out of, I'm going to pause the share. Oh, I see. Okay.
There we go.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Yeah, it's something weird with the mouse and so forth, the peripheral devices, but I think I've figured out I just have to click on the screen to advance. So yeah, so 3 things I wanted to talk about. First, just to set some context, is what does it take to make a killer app? Some good news and bad news, and finally, a beautiful mind, followed by an app story and a demo. So just jumping in, a killer app. You need 3 things to make a killer app. And all of you who do FileMaker solutions are building apps or applications. I'll call them apps now, but basically the same 3 things are required for, and it doesn't matter what the solution is, you need 3 things to make a killer app. The first one is it needs to be useful. That's the easy part, especially for you guys. Building the functionality into the database and into the solution is the easy part. The next part comes from making it usable, which is more difficult, as we'll talk about in a little bit. But you could have all the functionality in the world, and if it's difficult to access or get to, or that the customer or the user can't figure out how to get to it, then that's not going to be a killer app. And finally, even after you have both of those things right, there's a kind of a secret ingredient at the end, which any of you who are Steve Jobs fans would understand this or would know this, and that is delight. The user needs to feel wonderful when they're using your app. It's got to, they feel wonderful, A, because you're giving them the utility of the functionality that you're giving them. You're making it super easy to use, and they just feel good when they're using it. They come into the app, they use it, they go away. Some of your apps are business apps. They'll be in there all day long. Sometimes they're mobile app. They'll be in there just for a minute or two. But basically, those are the three things that require or that a killer app requires. And that maps exactly to what my work is in user experience. So I'm a freelance product designer. And that's what I love. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning is to create apps that people love to use. They're indispensable for them because they have great functionality and value, and they're super easy to use, and they look great, and it feels good using them. So that's what my work is. There's good news and bad news. The good news is that now you know how to make a killer app. And the bad news is that it takes a certain kind of mindset to do that. And what I mean to say is the bad news is that I don't believe that being a developer, I don't believe that you can do that on your own, that you can't make a killer app on your own. And the reason is there's very different mindsets required. So many of you would be systems thinkers, and we've got the picture here from Beautiful Mind where it's all systems and engineering and math, and that is its own beauty. But it's a very different mindset than what it takes to have the empathy for a user and understand usability and how humans interact with machines and the emotions that they have and that sort of thing. So it's very rare that the same person can be both of those things, can be like a genius on the development side and a real empath on the other side and a great designer. So it's not to say that you can't learn things, and we'll talk about a couple of things that are kind of common mistakes in FileMaker applications. But my point, I guess, is different, and this I take a little bit of a different stand than other user experience people do, especially user experience people who talk in the FileMaker community, and that is I'm not. Can you guys mute? Somebody's got a lot of background noise there. Thank you. A lot of people will try to teach developers how to create great UX or to learn tips, and there's the web is full of those kind of tips if you want to search that. But what I think is the better idea is for you to partner with somebody, whether it's somebody like me or even a student who's a UX person or somebody who's a great user experience designer, because that's what's going to get you to a killer app. I don't think you can get there on your own, and I think it's really hard. You can get close. You can make your solutions better and more usable, but I don't believe it's possible to have them become a killer app unless you're working with a professional in user experience. Because you guys have, as I've mentioned, that the functionality part of it, you guys have in spades, because you know about recursive functions and custom functions, and you know how to make it work great. But as we'll see, FileMaker solutions are not always that usable, and very few of them that I've seen have been delightful. What you're seeing here is a combination or a collection of actual screens of FileMaker solutions. And we've all seen kind of horror stories about that, but they all share kind of the similar problem, at least the examples that I've given here. One is cognitive overload to the nth degree. Like there's just no way a human being can look at this screen and intuitively figure it out. So the trying to train somebody to use a system like this would be a gigantic effort, and I'm not sure of how many of you guys are directly involved in doing support for the applications that you guys have created, but it's an absolute nightmare trying to train and support an application like this. So there could be the greatest functionality in the world behind these applications, but they're completely unusable by regular humans until they spend a lot of time learning all the intricacies of how the system works and how the system thinks. And that's one of the big challenges, and it's something that people often get wrong, is the what we say in user experience is the mental model that's used by the system's, way it thinks, doesn't match up with the way that human beings think. And so trying to, or in particular, the users of your application, but in general, human beings as well. So trying to match those two things is a really, really hard thing to do. It's like where the art comes in. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through. But that's one of the primary things that many FileMaker solutions suffer from, even the ones that don't look this bad, or even the ones that don't have this many things on there. So here's an example of, so we've created a monster. Everybody's seen those solutions where they start out and then the customer asks for this function, and then that function, and then that function. And all of a sudden we've added like 20 more buttons to the screen so that they can do everything from one place, and it just becomes an absolute nightmare. Here's an example of one of the FileMakers used by permission, one of the FileMaker developers in Toronto, who has a customer who's a big liquor control board here in Ontario, and one of the previous screens that I showed was actually that system's first iteration, and he's been brought in new to the project, and he's tried to bring a little bit more of a nice design to the solution. And he took his inspiration here from I think one of the Microsoft tools, and I can't remember exactly which one it is, but it looks great, and it looks definitely simpler than what they had before. But when I see a couple more screens, here's another one of his screens, which, while it looks okay, now I'm starting to see immediately, here's an example where even though the developer has the blueprint for what it should look like to make it simpler, then we get into a screen like this where now all of a sudden there's 10 or 15 things that they can do on this screen, and there's no real clear hierarchy of information about what they should do first or any kind of a sense of workflow. And so that's one of the prime example of somebody who's made it better, but it's nowhere near a killer app because of all those things. Okay, so there's the context. I'm going to talk a little bit about a FileMaker solution that I built that had been working on for many years for a basketball league. I play a lot of basketball and have for many years, and I manage all the technology for our league, like the website and that sort of thing. So our problem was scorekeeping. So we have volunteer or like minimum wage high school kids who are scorekeeping our basketball games. Not sure how many of you would have actually played a basketball game, but this is what a score sheet looks like in a basketball game. Typically, they're done on paper by like some kid who's kind of partly interested, partly on Instagram, partly sleeping because he was up all night playing Fortnite. So we have a lot of issues with people making mistakes on these things. And then at the end of the game, these kids have to add these columns up and add these rows up. And as any of you who have teenage kids know now, that manually adding things up is not really something that they care to do or are good at. So there's a lot of mistakes. And then what they would have to do is, I think the next sheet I have here describes what the previous workflow was, which was take that analog score sheet. We had a league website we were using at the time called League Lineup. There's lots of other ones out there that you may have heard of, like Team Snap, and there's a bunch of them now. And they had like an input form on the website, which was a terrible input form that didn't add up any of the stuff automatically. So you actually had to enter how many shots of each type were in there, and then you had to manually, as the user, manually add them up. It was crazy. And I thought, this is insane, because first of all, we have all this pain being felt by these scorekeepers, and then the winning captains of all the games would have to take those score sheets and enter them into this website. And then they would get published on that website. But the other problem is that we had is because it was a pain in the ass to do this, that people would either not do it for a while or for a few days, or they would forget about doing it. So our standings in the league were not always up to date, because there'd be one captain that hasn't entered his scores for like 3 weeks in a row. So it was a broken system. And I wanted to do something different. So what I envisioned doing was to have an iPhone app, like a native iPhone app developed, and the website that we were using at the time, called Team Pages, was developing an API. So my plan was to develop an iOS app that would be able to send information through the API to the website. And that was the strategy. So what I did was I designed the mobile app, what it would look like, how it would work, and gave the specs to an iOS developer that I know and I trust, and he gave me a price to do this thing. And basically, I talked to the league management, and they approved the budget. So I had the budget to build this iOS app and utilize that API. But I was really worried about that because A, the API wasn't finished. And what happens when we start using this thing and all of a sudden their API breaks or they stop supporting it or something? Then my league is just in big trouble, because now we have no way of getting this stuff onto the website from the iOS app. So what I decided to do instead, to be safer, was to create a FileMaker Go app that was going to interact with my backend database that I already had in FileMaker for the league, and have a website built. So one of a guy that I know here in Ontario who runs the Ontario FileMaker meetup, Doug Gardner, said, I have a guy named Charles Delf that I work with, and he can actually build you a website, not a web direct one, but an actual website that will interact with your FileMaker Go app. And so I wanted to talk to him. So basically, I laid out this kind of plan for how we would do it, and then gave Charles the specs and said, how much is it going to cost you to build this website for me using your platform? So Charles is going to smile probably when he sees this one, but this is the kind of granularity of the design spec that I gave Charles, because I had a very specific vision in mind for how I wanted this thing to interact. I wanted it to look and feel just like the mobile app or the FileMaker Go app that I had developed for the scorekeepers to use, and I wanted to keep the design style throughout. And so Charles worked and said, yeah, we could get close to that, and then he actually added some capabilities to his platform to be able to get more exact to the design. And basically what we've come up with is I have a FileMaker Go app, which I'm going to demo for you in a second. And what you're seeing on the right are actual screen captures from the mobile optimized web app that Charles has created in FM BetterForms. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to, if I can, stop this share, and I'm going to share my iPhone, but if you just bear with me for 1 second here. Okay. Just need to do this through screen mirroring, so it'll take about 1 minute. Okay, perfect. And now I'm going to share my screen. And somebody give me a thumbs up if you can see an iPhone on your screen. Okay, perfect. Okay, so without further ado, I will launch into this this app. Markham Men's Basketball League is the league's name, so that's what MMBL stands for. So my goal here was to create an experience that was going to be streamlined and quick and easy for the scorekeepers to use rather than doing the paper. So this shows a list of the gyms that we have in our league, and every Wednesday night we have 11 games. There's 22 teams in our league. So I've created a game in the future, even though our season has been cut short because of COVID. I've created a new game in the future so that I can kind of show you how it works. So I'm going to select the Burr Oak Gym, and I have one upcoming game at this location because the scorekeepers only care about the games that are at that location on that night. But if I wanted to, I could go back and look at the previous games As you can see, after the scorekeepers finish with them and they publish the games, it goes to green status. But basically, I'm going to open up one of the games here. The animation is probably going to be a little bit jerky over Zoom, so I apologize for that. But we have a flip animation there. And so I have a choice between selecting back and forth between the home team and the visiting team. As you can see, the design is, I tried to make the design as close to a native native iOS app as I could. So I have the styles for the segment controller and so forth look just like, exactly like an iPhone. When they come into the game, rather than signing onto the score sheet, they would come over to the scorers table, and basically the scorer is just going to tap their name. And I'll try to do these things slowly because I know there's like a second or two delay on the Zoom. But basically, the scorekeeper would just go in here and mark which players are attending the game, and as you can see, their number becomes solid when they do that. So that's the in our league, it's visitor team always wears blue, and the home team always wears white. So we have reversible jerseys. So I'm going to go now into the home team, and I'm going to sign in a few of those people. We have the ability to, if somebody has the same number, let's see if any of these teams have somebody with the same number. They don't. Anyways, that's a use case that we have where if somebody, say, brought the wrong jersey or had to borrow a jersey, so David Wright is a number 14. If I click on the little ellipsis or tap on the ellipsis on the right-hand side, I can see that his regular number is 14, but I can give him a temporary number. So let's say he had to borrow a jersey that was number 66. And I close that. Now you can see that his number is 66. So that didn't change the database or anything. It just changes for this game that his number is 66. And you'll see when we get into the next screen why that's important. So what I'm going to do now is along the bottom, we're still in the sign up tab here. We're going to go to the scoring tab. And so here's where all the action happens in the game. So this is basically something that the scorekeeper can do easily one-handed. And that's what the design was, because they also have to work a score clock in the gym as well. Typically, we just have one scorekeeper per game, so they have to kind of multitask, and that's why it's really, really important that they be able to do this one-handed. So what happens is the game starts, and the blue team gets the ball, and they come down, and they score a three-point shot. So as you might imagine, scorekeeper taps the 3, and then what we see is just those players that have signed into that game. So there's no trying to find the numbers amongst the people who aren't there. This is like it's a progressive disclosure thing where we don't show those numbers until we need them, and we only show them the ones that they actually need. So I'm going to assign that. I'm going to assign that basket to number 21. So it basically, they tap that 21 button. It shows them a visual cue that it's tapped, and now you can see that the score is 3-0. And we'll keep going through this, so I'll just do a couple of examples here. So the white team scores a 2, and then the blue team scores a 2, and so now that you can see our score is 5-2. In our league, we each team has one timeout per half. So if I tap on the timeout for the blue team, you'll see that now all of a sudden that circle becomes hollow, so now they don't have any more timeouts that first half. If we go to switch to the second half up at the top, you can see that their timeout has been restored. If we go back to the first half, though, it will be gone for that half. I won't get into too many more of the details here, but basically if they make a foul shot, that gives them 1 point. If they have a foul and we assign a foul to somebody, it then shows how many team fouls that they have, because that's an important thing in a basketball game. Once they get to a certain number of team fouls, one team is shooting in a bonus situation. So all that stuff is taken care of by the logic. If they want to reverse the last thing that was done, they would click that button in the middle of the hardwood that shows the reset. So if I take that away, it'll take the last foul away. If that was a scoring thing where now it's 8-2, if I hit that button to reverse that play, it would take that one away and obviously recalculate the score. Another way to look at those previous plays is the play tab down at the bottom. So basically what this does is it gives a chronological order of every event, a reverse chronological order that was scored or foul called or timeout called. If they made a mistake, so the ref comes back and says, "Oh, that first 3 that you scored in the game, that was supposed to be a 2." So you can see number 21 scored a 3. I can just tap the 2 next to that, and it automatically changes that point value from a 2 to a 3 to a 2, and it adjusts the score accordingly. Couple other things. There's a tab for fouls, so it shows how many fouls and points somebody has, and we've got some logic in there that when a player gets to a certain number of fouls, it's color coded as yellow or red, and it gives a warning pop up for the scorekeeper so that they need to announce to the team that the person has 3 or 4 fouls, that they're in foul trouble. And the last tab for officials, so that lets the scorekeeper sign in, so they choose their name from a list. And then our scorekeeping officials, our referees, they all have a 3-digit code that they need to plug in there so we know which officials did the scorekeeping for that game. There's a capability of if there's one of the team defaults. So let's say the home team doesn't have enough players at the beginning of the game and they default the game. In our league and in many basketball leagues, those are scored as a 2-point victory, like a 2-0 victory for the team that did not default. So if I hit that toggle, now it indicates that the home team is defaulted, and even if they do play a game like an exhibition game, it'll still show the scores, but when it publishes it to the website, it'll show that it's a 2-point game. And lastly, we have some rules. So we have a whole scenario of rules in our league, and quite often it'll happen where at the end of a game somebody's arguing about how many timeouts they get in overtime or something like that. Well, this is a way for them to check out all those rules. So after the game is finished, so this game is 5-2, I'm going to mark the game as complete, and then now you can see in the upper right hand corner I have a publish button, and so when I click that button, within about 1 second, probably less, somewhere near a second, all the results for this game. So there could be up to 200 events in a game if it's a high-scoring game with a lot of fouls. And originally, I had designed the system to do that by importing those event records one at a time, but that was taking quite a while. And Charles came up with a brilliant idea to use JSON and basically just package up all those results that go along with those games. And all the stats for the players and stuff from this game, and just send it as a JSON text element, and then have that digested on his website. So basically, after 1 second after I publish this, I will publish this because their league's over, so nobody's looking at this. So I'll publish this. So it's going onto the website, and there you have it. So now this thing has been marked as published, and if I go on to, now I'm going to go on to the website actually, so we can see that. So I have a little MMBL icon on the bottom of my iPhone here, and this is basically just an iOS bookmark to the website that Charles built, again, which was designed to be used on a mobile device. You can look at it on a larger screen, but it's really designed for the mobile experience. So let me go back to the home screen here, just to show you. So we have 3 divisions in our league. And again, this is a purpose-built application for our league. I am in the process of trying to interview and do some discussions with other leagues to see if I can find enough of a subset of functions that would be common to multiple leagues to be able to create this as an actual product. And I'm still in the process of that. But this one is just for our league. So we have 3 divisions. We have a section here for news. So this is all news that's happening about the league and, about the league and, contact information and so forth. But basically, I'm going to select the elite division because that was the game that we just played. And what we see here is only the things that are, we see only those things that are important to the players. So the previous league team pages website that we were using, they had all kinds of stuff on there, like parents could, text their grandparents and send them a picture and do all this stuff. But there's a lot of stuff that our players really didn't care about. And that's why I wanted something that was really streamlined and just focused on the things that they cared about. So in our case, they care about where their team is in the standings. So that's what the home screen is here for this division. They care about the schedule and they care about their stats as, you know, related to other people. So one thing I'll show is on the team, if I click on a team, then it opens up that team's page, and you can see that all the player photos are loaded extremely quickly. And the reason this stuff all happens quickly is because when we first launched that division, and Charles can talk about this a little bit later when we get into talking about BetterForms, FM BetterForms. But basically, he fetched all of the data for the league. That's every game, every player stat, every event that's happened throughout the whole season. He just loaded in our entire season in like 1 second, sometimes, you know, 1 or 2 seconds. So it's fantastic. So that means that the experience for the user is that they can flip back and forth between all these things without seeing any kind of waiting icon or any kind of a waiting symbol. If I click on a player, so I'm going to click on Tom Filigiano. He's the leading scorer of this division. If I click on his player card, I can see his age, and it would have his height if he's entered it, if we have his height in the database, and with all of his stats, points per game, points, and so forth, and the ability to contact him. So right from my iPhone, if I need to get a hold of Tom, I know, you know, what team he's on. I can go in there and just tap on his phone number, and that will call him or text him, and tap on his email. That'll send him an email. So we'll get out of there now and go back to the division's home page. The next thing is the schedule. So we look at the schedule, and we can see which team won is the bolded name and the bolded number. So it shows you clearly which of the teams was the victor, even, you know, so you don't have to do the math to see which number is higher. Again, very clean look to this. And if we select one of those games that's already been played, we can go in and see the box scores for that for both of the teams. And that's our schedule tab. Okay, and finally the one, this is the one that the players all love, because they get to be able to trash talk each other about who scored more points. And when they get back to the bar, that's the beauty of this thing, is because it's so fast, and now we don't have to wait for any manual things to be done on the website, so that after the game's finished, everybody goes to the bar afterwards, and by the time you get your shower done and you get back to the gym or back to the bar and to have a beer, everybody's harping on you about how many points you didn't score, or you did score, or I scored more than you, or whatever. So everybody can see what's going on in almost real time. It's about there's a timer from the server. So the game results get to the server in like 1 second, and then we have, I think the timer is 20 minutes. Every 20 minutes it checks for any games that have been played and then pulls that to the live website. So players, you can see that in this case we've got the points per game tab selected, so it shows you who's got the best number of points per game and so forth, and it's loaded in all 80 players and what all their stats were. If we want to choose who the best three-point shooter is and so forth, this is pretty straightforward. You just pick the category that you want to take a look at, and it shows all the players ranked, and there's some logic that that indicates what the ranking is. So if two players had the same number of points, that they would be tied. So here in this case, we've got two players tied with for fourth place with 96 field goals made. And that's about it. One thing you can see is as we're loading that page, you can see you've got like an animated GIF there that basically shows what the data is that they're about to be looking at. So that kind of enhances the user experience a little bit. And basically that is it. So I'm going to stop my share just for a minute here and get rid of this phone as well. And I will share one more thing back in that keynote. Let's see if I can get that to work. Yeah. Okay. I just want to show a couple of very short examples. No demo or anything. Oh, sorry. One of the comments that I wanted to make about the designing and building the app was most of the screens are responsive. In other words, they can, work on an iPad or an iPod, iPhone, various sizes of iPhones. But this screen in particular was more complicated. These are all where you see the player numbers. Those are all individual portals showing different positions of the relationship. And because of the way that FileMaker does responsive layouts, it's fairly limited compared to some of the other tools that we have in the world now. So I actually created and built 3 different size versions of this screen, and then I basically sniff for the device when they load the scorekeeping app, and so it's optimized for those devices. So this is probably the only screen where I really had to do that. The rest of them I could just use FileMaker's kind of out of the box, pin to the right, pin to the left, that sort of thing. And finally, I just want to show a couple other real-world examples with no demo. But this is an example of actually a customer in LA who has a medical app for insurance companies, basically to manage cases. And on the left, I'm showing what his early version of FM BetterForms version of his system was. So he has a FileMaker version that he's got in market already with a lot of insurance companies, and he's creating an FM BetterForms version of it. So this was the first stab that he took at that. And what I wanted to show was he hired me to create the user experience for what it could look like, and so now he's in the process of building that, and he's going to be getting Charles to help him with some of that. But things like down the left-hand side, he had a whole combination of actions and navigation all in the same place. People don't tend to, they need to, in order to have this be a killer app, people have to understand what the actions are, what the navigation is, and so forth. So in the middle, what you're seeing, the other thing is he had all the like dashboardy kind of stuff on the right-hand side, but not being able to see any of the actual cases, and you had to do something separate to be able to see cases. So I basically created a view that shows the cases, shows all the kind of dashboard information on the left, and then they can hide that dashboard information by clicking the hide news at the top, and then that will close that panel. And then on the right, there's just like a detailed view of one of those cases that somebody might have clicked into, and there's basically it's just organized. It doesn't look sexy. It's nice and clean, but it's much more usable than what he had before, was because there was a lot of points where the user would be confused about what to do next. And so that's one of the nice things about coming up with a good user experience, is that you make it easy for them to figure out what the next thing to do is. And then finally, this is one that was working on this week. Charles, you haven't even seen this one, but this is a mutual client of Charles and I. He runs a business for florists, and he has a very robust FileMaker system. Like, it's crazy how many things this thing does. And so he's got a bunch of independent FileMaker florist shops using this thing. And so he had, for a long time, like many people who develop FileMaker solutions, you build something to get it done because the client needs something, and you think, okay, I'll go back and make it look pretty, or I'll go back and try to figure out the user experience later, or make it more usable. And then things just don't happen. So basically, he's got a solution that has something like 400 layouts in it for all these various things that it does. And in essence, when I went in and started playing with the system, I realized that he has no navigation in this system. Really what he has is, he's got a list which he calls workflows. So basically any function that you can do with the application, he's got this giant long list of like 90 things that are, things that you can do with the application. And he calls them workflows. And basically he's given a type ahead list here. So I type in the first few, if I want to do accounts receivable or something, I type in ACC, and it shows me those workflows. And then I click into it, and I get into this full screen with all this other things that they can do with it. Problem was, it was, and then he had a concept of favorites. So if you went through this difficult process of finding these things, then you could favorite them so they would show up on this list if you had the favorites tab selected, which, by the way, looks like a button. So anyways, there's some visual things there as well. But basically, to run the flower shop, you'd have to go individually back in and keep selecting these things. And so I realized or pretty early on as I was playing with it, that there's really no navigation. So what I came up with was inspired by, I don't know if any of you use FreshBooks. It's a new accounting program for freelancers and small businesses. And I really like the way that they've done their interface. So I kind of designed something that was kind of styled after that. So it may look familiar to you if you've used FreshBooks at all. But basically, I asked the client to take that list of 90 workflows or 100 workflows that he has and organize them, group them by category. And he didn't understand why. I said, just trust me, just group them by category, send me a list. So I came back and I took those categories and created sections on the website for them in the main navigation. And added, there's a couple of them that he didn't have as categories, like product was one of the workflows that existed somewhere buried down in admin settings. And I'm thinking, if I'm a flower owner or if I'm a shop owner or something like that, creating, setting up new products and changing the prices on a product and so forth. Those are things I'm going to do all the time. So I added that as one of those categories. And so what you're looking at right now is that products are selected. You can favorite one. So I still kept the concept of favorites, although he had 2 levels of favorites. You can't see it in this screen capture, but there's another third tab over to the right of favorite workflows, which was called alternate workflows, which was yet another type of favorite list, but just not quite as favorite as the first. And I found that to be like super confusing. And most users know what a favorite is if you use any other modern application, but having a second level of favorites, what I found to be a very confusing concept. So I just recommended that he kill that one and keep the favorites. So you can see on the main screen here, up near the top where his avatar would show up, there's something called My Favorites, which would be any of those workflows that they use commonly day to day. They'd be able to set up as their favorites and then just instantly have those available. So the big advantage there was, for example, reports. He had reports buried under one of those workflows that you see there on the left-hand side, is called Settings Admin. So you had to dig to find Settings Admin, and then you had to open up another long list like that and dig to find the reports that you wanted. Or sorry, you wanted to find reports, and then you have to go into select a report. So this way, they can, from the home screen, can just click on reports and select the ones that they want to use, and they can, of course, have those as a favorite as well. But so I won't spend any more time on that. I just wanted to show a couple of examples of this is an app that's for sale in the market, and he has to spend a ton of time training people and a ton of time doing support. And so if you make a killer app out of it, then you're going to dramatically reduce your training costs, and you're dramatically going to reduce your support costs and your effort. So, so aside from, a lot of people look at this and say, "Oh yeah, you just made it prettier," but that's not the point. I mean, yes, it is prettier, and it's it's pleasant to look at and it's delightful to use, but the real reason it's delightful is because I added the usable part and to take UX best practices and apply them to his solution. So I encourage you to do that in your solutions by hooking up somehow with an expert or a student or somebody who's using that in the user experience field, because they're going to be able to look at things in a way that you just can't look at. You might think you can, and you can make it better, but if you really want to get to something that's a killer app, and especially if you have like a vertical solution that you have worked on, I highly recommend that you do that. In addition to learning about it yourself, sure, that'd be great, but hook up with somebody, and I think it'll really help you get there. This is just another example of an existing system that I'm working on. This is a FileMaker system that I won't go into many details about, but here's what I've come up with for his design. And he is just quite excited about it, and have had a bunch of meetings with his clients, which are airlines. This is about airline catering. That's what his software does. And so they're super excited about that. But it's, again, taking them from something that was fully functional and useful, but hard to train people on, and coming up with something that just feels more natural for them to use. And so that's it for me. I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to stop sharing, and let me just see if I can get out of that and close this out of here. And Charles, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, actually, Fred, Bob asked, can you talk about the design parameters of your iPhone screens?
I can. Bob, it'd be interesting. Maybe you could unmute your mic, Bob, and just give me an idea of what kind
I
of
was
parameter.
thinking about you were using a lot of white space. I noticed the screen's usually in the bottom third. And I was interested in, when you had lists, how many items you'd have in a list.
Right. Okay.
When you had columns, how you restricted the column, just the design things you took to make those iPhone screens usable.
I see. In terms of the list of the length of the lists, it's driven by how many players are in a division. So there's 80 players in a division typically. All of that data is loaded right at the very beginning of opening up the.
But I'm thinking in terms of not the data, but the presentation screens. You had 80 players, but you restricted. I never saw more than 8 players on any list.
Sure, yeah. The reason there, what I can say there is I tried to emulate as closely as possible what a native iOS experience would be, and so the things that are important there are not barraging somebody with, not trying to squeeze. Like this is a mobile device; it's a small device, so having a row size, for example, like a row height of anything less than if somebody has to interact with it, anything less than like around 40 points high or 40 pixels high would be too small. So I tried to keep those, row height, for example, standard to what would be on a typical iPhone. Like if you're on your iPhone and you go into your settings app or something like that, those toggles, the font size and so forth was all basically designed to make it feel like it was a native app. I'm not sure if that answers your question or if you have a specific, another specific question.
No, that's pretty good. I did notice you like to have white space in the bottom of your screens.
There was some white space on the. So if I'm showing a list of the standings in the league, so in this division there's only 8 teams. So I'm showing this on an iPhone 10. Which has a taller screen than an iPod, for example. But hang on, I'm talking about the website here, but let me go back to talk about the FileMaker Go app. Because I've tried to keep the list, so when the player at the gym opens up the app, the scorekeeper rather opens up the app. First of all, we only have 4 gyms that we play at, so only 4 rows are required, so there's a white space on that screen. But that's okay, because at that moment in their workflow, what their task is to pick one of those gyms. So I don't want to show them anything else on that screen. I only want to show them what they need to do right now. And that's part of what's really important about making a great mobile experience, is to really understand the stages in the workflow and give them only what they need at each particular stage. Give them everything they need at a particular stage, but only disclose that as they need it. So they select the gym, then they go into a list, which is a list of games at that location. So for them, there's only 3 games at that location. So there's 3 rows at the top of that list. There's a lot of white space there because there's no more games at that location. I could show them every game in the schedule at that location, but that would be confusing and unnecessary to them. It's what we call noise or visual distraction. So I'm highlighting just those 3 games that are at that division, at that gym on that night. And then they open up the scoring screen and so forth. So yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, you did. You covered it pretty well. Thank you.
Okay. Another question here. It seems easier to create a focused app for an iPhone, iPad device than for desktop. Is it more difficult than the desktop when you're likely to have much more data? It's a good question. Yeah, is it more difficult when working with a desktop app where you're likely to have much more data and functionality? What do you consider when moving an old, complex business screen to a delightful experience from a desktop? I would say a couple of things. The same exact principles apply, although you can show more on a desktop. The last example that I showed, which was for the airline catering software, I tried to, as I was only able to show you one or two screens of that application, but there's definitely more going on. But I also really fought hard to take out things that weren't weren't really required at that point in time. So it is a little bit more difficult for a desktop app, typically because the client wants to jam more things onto the screen. So the client understands when I'm holding a device this size, they know that only so much fits on this screen. So they kind of get the argument. They may not like the trade-offs that they have to do. They may still try to just make the font size so small so they can get everything in and get all the columns into that table. When it comes to desktop, then so many clients would say, "Oh, well, we need to add this functionality. Okay, well, there's some white space over in the corner here, so let's add it down here." And I think that one of the other reasons why it's important to get a UX professional involved in your projects is when it comes time to having that conversation with the client, they're really good at it because they can explain, they can really explain well, whereas if you're a developer and you're building this thing and you may not have a good argument for why to not do that. So having a professional who can kind of tell the big picture and say, here, we know this about how humans interact with systems. And I know that you want to be able to give them a lot of functionality. Like one of the screen captures I showed in that monstrosity page with all those giant applications. One of them, the guy had like 70 buttons on one screen. They all looked the same. There are 70 buttons, but he was bragging because he was saying, you can get to anywhere in my system with one click. Well, okay, that may be true because he read somewhere that, less clicks is better. But less clicks is not always better. It really depends on the context and what people need to see at the time. So, great question. I tend to approach it the same way, and I always design my systems from a mobile-first perspective because that's way harder. So it's really easy to go from a small screen size to a larger screen size, and it's really hard to create something on a big screen and then make it go smaller because you have to really, really understand, if you're going to do a good job of it, you have to really understand the concepts that go into how do you break down that workflow, what is important, what can you hide until they need it. Going through that whole exercise, you can come up with something. And I do most of my projects. I think I want to make it easy for people to use on this thing, even if, and I guarantee you, I don't know how many people are on the call right now, but many of those people's clients are going to say, "Oh, our users will never use this from mobile. They only work from desktop." Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. A, it was designed for desktop and there's 70 buttons on it and nobody can, it's completely unusable on a mobile device. So what I would say is everybody uses mobile devices. If your job is that you have to make sure that all these trolleys are getting loaded correctly for this airline flight that's going out that has, 500 people on it that they got to serve dinners to, and your job is to make sure all that stuff happens, but you had to go take your kid to the dentist and you still want to check on it, but you're not at work, what would you love to be able to do? You'd love to be able to open up your phone and check to see what the status is. So there's a use case where the developer of the FileMaker system that's this big would just say, well, they just use it on their desktop. So this is why I always, that's the second reason why I always do mobile first design, because I want people to use it on any device. And then that's when it becomes delightful, because if you have a high pressure job and you can only get to that thing on your laptop, Are you going to carry your laptop with you and tether it to your phone when you're in the dentist's office with your kid? Like it's not going to happen. So I don't know if that answered the question about the desktop thing.
Yeah, thank you.
Fred?
Yeah.
Fred, hey, I just want to remind everybody they should use the raised hand feature here so we can kind of moderate this a little bit. So we now have a question from Bob Shockey. So Bob, take it.
Yeah, Fred, I was just wondering, when you're designing for iOS devices, like I know you showed several different screen resolutions that you designed for, particularly between iPhone and iPad. That's a pretty obvious, easy choice. But are you generally designing for the latest phone, the most popular iPhone, because I mean, it seems like every model of iPhone that comes out, even from 10 to 11, there are differences, and then you have to account for, the maxes and things like that. So are you going with lowest common denominator and then sliding your objects in such a way that they'll expand to a larger device? Or
yes, I'm starting with 320 width, which is the minimum. For like an iPhone SE or an iPod. Like in our case, we made the decision to go with an iOS device, but not every kid owns, some of them have Android phones. So we talked about trying to develop something in Android, but FileMaker, of course, doesn't support that yet, and it was going to cost lots of money to do that. So my iPhone developer said, well, why don't you just give the kid an iPod? It's way cheaper than developing an Android app, because we only have a very few number of users. So the cheapest thing that we could get for them was an iPod, which is tiny little thing with a 320 pixel width screen. So to answer your question, yes, I would develop for the lowest common denominator with sliding fields and so forth, up until the point where it became not feasible to do that with the FileMaker tool. So that layout that I have, that's basically the score pad. I couldn't do that because FileMaker doesn't allow you to have two objects next to each other grow in size to still use half the screen. So they don't have relative sizing. They're talking about bringing that in a coming version, but I just went and re-listened to that announcement, and now I'm thinking that they may only be bringing that in for the WebDirect side of things. So I'm not sure, but there are some screens that you really can't make work in using the sliding objects. But generally speaking, that's what I do. Is I would design for the lowest common denominator. The difference between the iPhone 10, for example, and iPhone 11 Plus or whatever, that goes up to like a 1440 pixel width, and they generally speaking, the stuff that I design looks great on those things as well. And if there's something that I could make use of the space better, in other words, if there's some type of thing that I'd like to show but I can't because of the nature of it on a screen that's only 320 pixels wide, then in that case, that's when I would create a separate layout for that, and then just sniff to find out when they launch the device in the startup script, what size is the screen and so forth, and then I can kick them to the right layout. Answer your question?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Terrific. So in the interest of time, any other questions?
Yeah, I was going to say, any other questions?
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody.
Dina, Ralph has a question. Go, sure. Take it away, Ralph.
Yeah, just a quick question. Have you ever considered actually using the SDK to publish to the App Store, just for the fun of it? Even though I know
I am considering it for my league. Basically just for the headache factor for me is because every time I create a new version of this or something, and we not only give this to all the kids who are scorekeepers, which we have like 4 or 5 scorekeepers, but we also want to give it to all the captains in the case that one of the scorekeepers like calls in sick or something, so that the captains can use it. But trying to send out a note with here's the Dropbox link to my FileMaker Go file, which now you need to get FileMaker Go, and then you need to get, you need to grab it from the Dropbox, and then Dropbox's interface is confusing, so they have no idea how to open this thing up. It's a nightmare for me to try to do that. So I definitely want to do that, use the iOS SDK. I haven't done that yet. I've been, learning about it, and I'm kind of 50-50 on whether I want to try that myself or just hire somebody who knows about how to do that quickly, because they could probably do it a lot faster than I could bumble my way through it.
Well,
have you done that?
Yes, I have about 5 apps on the App Store that are FileMaker based. It's a pain, don't get me wrong. But something else that you might want to look into is live code. Live Code has come out with a thing called Live Code FM, which allows you to actually take a FileMaker solution and convert it, in effect, not just for an iOS app, but also for Android.
Really?
Yes. Don't get me wrong. They want their money too.
Yeah.
And I have not personally used it. However, it is a potentially viable option. I just wanted to point it out for what it's worth. So,
and I have a question for you, a response question, which is, sure. If you've used the iOS SDK for multiple apps, I know that FileMaker makes a big deal out of saying, we don't support this.
Right.
And I kind of suspect it's because they want to sell licenses, but I'm not sure. Have you had any problems with that? Because what they seem to be claiming at FileMaker anyways is that there's a danger that if FileMaker comes out with a new version of the iOS system, that it can break your application, or you have to go in and redo a bunch of work or whatever. Have you found that to be onerous, the process of launching it using the iOS SDK on the App Store and then updating things?
It's a serious consideration, and my recommendation in this case would be to do the following. A, you don't really put the app on the App Store at all. What you're really doing is to create a launcher that ties into the app on the server, which means, of course, that in effect, once your app is approved, you can make whatever changes you want because you're really doing it on the server. That's point one. Okay. Point two, I would seriously look into Geist Interactive has Zinc, I think is what they call it. The important part is that if you use that launcher model in conjunction with the GoZync, I think is what it's called, Geist Interactive.
Right.
And in effect, what happens is that once you get it approved, if you get it approved, then you don't have to bother about the App Store, period. Meaning
nice.
that you can literally update the app from within without Apple even being aware of it.
Wonderful. That's great. And it would work.
I haven't personally used that aspect. I'm just aware of it. I can't afford it, unfortunately. But that is definitely theoretically the ideal scenario that I can imagine. But if you want, I'll be more than happy to talk about it with you separately. You're welcome to.
Thank you. Thank you very much for answering my question. And the one challenge that I have about the launcher model is one of our requirements is that this thing needs to work offline. So it needs to work in a gym that has no Wi-Fi, no cell phone signal, which is one of the reasons why it's challenging for me to create an app that's going to be going back and forth to the server every time somebody scores. I want all the activity captured on the device and then take that as a chunk and send it across the network. So
that's perfectly where the GoZync would solve your problem.
Oh, it would. Okay, great. Well, I'll take a look at it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Fred, I think we have I don't know who RevBiz is, but we can have one quick question from RevBiz.
Okay, that's Dave Borov. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, Dave.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, real quick, I just wanted to mention that I made apps for the iOS App Store, and what I did was I made website friendly with a FileMaker backend. And then I created that, and then I used what's called Adobe PhoneGap to turn it into an actual iOS app. And I've submitted, 4 or 5 things to the App Store, and they've all been received. And then one thing I could mention is that after doing all of that, I simply now, for the most part, just make web-friendly web pages, mobile-friendly web pages that work perfectly on almost any phone with a FileMaker backend, and I don't even bother with the apps now. And it's just, you can update your page anytime you want, and everybody gets it on any phone, so I can recommend that. And then you just said something about there's no data, like maybe you're offline. Well, there's a magic thing called progressive web apps, which is a new way to basically create apps that can work offline. And that's another animal for another time, but you could look into that. So everything with a FileMaker backend, but just a mobile first web design.
Got it. Thank you very much, Dave. Appreciate it.
Okay, one last question from Corey. Make it quick. Unmute yourself, Corey.
Yeah, sorry. It's not really a question so much, but an observation. An easier way that I found to download and update FileMaker Go apps, I used a series of shortcuts to download from a Dropbox to a URL shortener, and then it just went to it downloaded it from a URL and then put it into FileMaker Go. It's like 4 or 5
is this
steps.
for your own personal use or for a bunch of people in an organization?
It was just for my own personal use, but there's no reason it couldn't be used on any number of other devices. I've shared that shortcut with other people as well.
Oh, cool. Great. Thanks for the tip. I appreciate it, Corey.
Instead of going through the approval process, it might be easier.
Got it. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay. Sounds like we're good. Thank you very much for having me, guys, and I'll stick around because if there's any other questions related to what Charles is going to talk about, I'll be around as well. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Fred. Appreciate it. Okay, Charles, it's your show now.
All right. Well, good afternoon, or we're almost afternoon. Good morning, everybody. So, BetterForms was the product that Fred had mentioned, and what basically I'll show you a little bit about what it is today. BetterForms is a web publishing front end for FileMaker, and it's not. A lot of people think, well, aren't you competing with WebDirect? And it's not really competing with WebDirect because it does things that WebDirect just doesn't do now, and most likely will never ever do. So BetterForms allows basically FileMaker developers to build scalable web apps. And somebody had mentioned PWAs. PWA, a progressive web app, is and SPAs, or single page web apps, are what BetterForms actually does. A progressive web app is a standard that was set up by Google originally. And it basically means that the app has to have certain criteria. It has to be able to have some offline functionality. It has to load relatively quickly, and there's a couple other things that has to use some back-end technology called service workers and things like that. For all intents and purposes, it means it's an app that you can save to your home screen on your phone. All right, that's really the core concept of what a PWA is. Whether it works offline, it's actually not totally part of the requirement, but because there's just certain apps that just don't necessarily translate over from a web app into an offline app. The basketball app that Fred showed displayed earlier, and we'll have a look at that, and I'll have a look at we'll look at some things that have been built in BetterForms. If you have any questions or anything, but please jump right in, and I'll try to keep them try to address them right as we go, rather than at the end. And I prefer that because I think we can maintain context. And don't mind me if I cut you off to try to keep going, because it might defer the question. So basically, BetterForms allows you to build web apps. If you're already doing some kind of web publishing, which is what I used to do a lot of freelance web stuff and API stuff years ago before it became really popular for FileMaker developers, kind of a hired gun that way. And I realized that there was this need for developers to build complex web apps, not just stuff that surfaces the data in a semi-static fashion, but to build something that has a lot of interactivity, like you saw with that basketball app. So what I want to do is I want to show you some stuff that we've built, or that actually clients have built, and then we'll jump into how that interacts with FileMaker. So I'm going to start off with a website called, it's actually Under Armour Athletics owns a company called High Major Sports, and High Major Sports is a marketing company that manages events for Under Armour. So we're just going to log in. BetterForms has authentication. So I'm logging in as a user. And what this site does is it acts as a portal to an entire FileMaker backend. So everything you see here within the site is fully powered by FileMaker. Excuse me. Okay, so basically, these are basketball events, and they're high-level tournaments that are run by Under Armour, and the coaches About 1,500 or so have to log into this application and register their teams and take care of a bunch of things here. So we're going to just navigate. Now, this is a relatively simple app. It doesn't have a lot of customization. It's more or less, for the most part, out of the box in terms of BetterForms. But BetterForms allows you to customize things quite a bit. So in this case, I can add a new team here, or I can go in and I can manage my teams. And here it's the Airballer Elite team. The team has 20 people on the roster, but 16 participants happen to be registered for this particular event. And it looks like some of the people don't have a complete waiver. So one of the components of this is that they send out an email, and the email has a link to all of the players, or each player receives an email. They click on that, and they have a waiver that they have to sign per registration. And that waiver may not vary. And they have to capture a digital signature, and then that information gets reported back into the back end of FileMaker and surfaced over here. The basketball coaches can do things like manage their teams. They can manage their coaches, and they can go in and they can manage their staff here. You can see this is all dummy data. But I only have one item on here, which I'm okay with, but we'll add some more things on here. This is unrelated to Fred's basketball, by the way. This is purely coincidental. And I can add a few other things here. We'll change my role here and hit save. And you see that just updated in the background here. So this is a live, 100% live in FileMaker. Excuse me. The most important part of this app is this section here. And basically, the fundamental purpose of the application is to collect payments to register these teams. So the user can come in, they can check off the items that they want to pay for, and they can make a payment. This app is using Authorize.net's payment gateway, but we have examples of probably about 7 or 8 different payment gateways that you can use. This one's built in. It's part of BetterForms, same as PayPal, Stripe, all the common ones. But any third-party library, as long as that particular payment gateway has a JavaScript widget, you can pretty much incorporate into BetterForms. All right. Any questions about that so far? I'm going to jump over to Fred's application here, and he had demonstrated it on a mobile device, but we'll talk about it a little bit more in detail. So this one has a lot of customization. You may have noticed Fred is a little particular with his design, and this is probably one of the first things. I actually built this app, and we built it a couple of years ago. And in all honesty, I haven't really made a lot of changes, very, very subtle changes to it since then. But at the time, we didn't have the ability for BetterForms. So it was an early product. We didn't have all the abilities to dial it in perfectly to what Fred wanted. So we added those features in. But some of the neat things here is all of this information here, and I don't think Fred demonstrated this, but all of this text on the news and this about section, that's all dynamic, and it comes from FileMaker. Fred, on the back end here, do you actually, you must have to, do you use FileMaker's stylings? Is that how you get that bold?
Yes.
Right, yeah. So basically it's using actual FileMaker native stylings, highlight the stuff, underline, and he's theming that all up, and you're just passing it on to the front end here. A couple other neat things that this particular app does is it goes to the back end, and it actually grabs, as Fred mentioned, it grabs the entire more or less the entire database of at least all the information we care about. And the reason we do that is 95% of the time the user is navigating back and forth. They're going into here, they're going back over to here, they're going back. So there is zero lag time, aside from the animation time, to navigate through this data. So we're taking this giant rich data object, and we're basically surfing up and down on it. And that's what's happening here. Right, and that gives the user a native app feel. Not only are they launching the icon from their phone desktop or phone homepage, but their navigation itself is seamless. There's zero lag time. Fred was very particular. He said, "I do not want any lag time when we load." So that's why we did that. It also has some other benefits. It allows the app to be a little bit more scalable because we don't have to make any calls to the server. So that means you can have a really small server. The server that's actually powering this is just a T2 small. And it's actually powering a whole bunch of other stuff as well. Because when you get rid of all the UI in FileMaker and you have FileMaker just serving data, it's a whole different experience, and it's really, really performant. So a lot of people don't realize that because they're always thinking from the context of FileMaker client. So that's a little bit more detail about that app. And what we'll do is we'll drop to one other one, and then we'll look at how BetterForms works under the hood. This app is an application for Indonesian and Malaysian palm oil farmers. And they have a mandate this year that they have to get traceability, basically account for every step along the way, like for organic traceability, I guess it is, right down from the actual guy who cuts the plant down, whatever the plant looks like, to the person that crushes it and all this kind of stuff like that. So this is really meant as a mobile app, like so. And the idea here is this is actually the second version of the app. The original version of the app we had designed, and I had helped them to design it, but I pushed back a lot of the design because it was, in all honesty, it was really bad. And then Fred got a hold of it, and he changed some of the stuff, and he kind of went for the mobile first approach, which really makes sense because these farmers, most of them will have phones. They'll have maybe like an older phone or something like that, or an Android. No offense to the Android owners. So in this case, they can go through, they can watch a video on how to use the app and a little bit of background information, and then they can proceed to the main application. And Fred actually did a really nice job of breaking this workflow down because it was a really complex workflow. And in this case, they can go through, they can make their changes that they want.
Charles.
Yes.
Sorry, I think you wanted to be interrupted. So does this require, even for those farmers out in who knows where, a live connection?
It does. But if they have a phone, they have a live connection, right? So it's not a problem. It's not really meant to be used offline. It doesn't really have an advantage to be using it to use offline in this particular use case. All right, so they can go through and they have a bunch of things and they check what their current suppliers. Now this is all live. That's live updating in the background with FileMaker and so on. And then they can continue. They can add new mills. They have an industry database that they can look things up. And this is doing a live type ahead. So if I say JUK, it's doing a quick, guess there's nothing there, a quick look up in the FileMaker's backend and grabbing data. And then they continue on and they go through and they have different little progress indicator here and gather some additional data. And they can also go through with this information as well. So it's a pretty in-depth app. The app is going to be launching next week. So there's a couple little spots that are not totally finished, I think, in some deeper screens. But for the most part, I think it's ready to go. There's a little bit of debugging information on there, so we won't look at that. But that's kind of the idea of the things that people build in BetterForms. I'll show you one more, and I don't want to just talk about mobile apps, but we are kind of talking about that. And I noticed I wasn't going to demonstrate this one here, but this is a mobile version of that florist point of sale application. And Mark, the company owner, and mostly he's also a primary developer. He met with Fred and talked about the specifications. And basically the idea is they have a FileMaker vertical, and like many people who have verticals, they have separate instance of the FileMaker database. So they replicate the database. And he has, say, 300 flower shops or whatever that all have this version of, or whatever version of FileMaker database in the back end. And that's what they're running internal to their store. But then they have a delivery guy, and the delivery guy, he comes in at, say, 10 o'clock and he looks through the shelves and he's got his mobile device with him as well. And he wants to gather all the information off the shelf. So basically the idea here is he comes in and he picks these different things. There's something kind of peculiar with the Zoom share. It's flashing the screen. It doesn't actually do that normally. And I think it's something to do, some interaction with the way Zoom renders things. But there is a little animation here that happens. And he picks all these items, and then he begins his trip. And from here, right away, it jumps into a display to show you which item that you wanted to, or what address. You can see there's a first address and second address. And just to jump back into Fred's presentation a bit, there's a real subtle thing here. And I think Fred suggested this, is you can see that there's a slight amount of previous card there, because one of the things we found that is if this actually scrolls to here, there's no indication that this is a list. So it's intentional that it leaves a little bit of a card. I think that was Fred's idea. I'm not sure. If it's a bad idea, then it wasn't. All right. And then finally, you know, the user can make a phone call. They can call really, really easy. Now, one of the things is somebody had mentioned about information and designing for desktop and designing for mobile, and about how, you know, information on a desktop, there's usually a lot more. The original drawing that Mark had for this app had a ton of information, and Fred basically got rid of it all and just put the minimal amount of information. Like when you're in this pick list here, just the information that you need. You don't need to see what the person's address is. It's a little bit there, but you don't really need to see what their names are and stuff. It makes no difference when you're loading up a van, right? And as to be a bit blunt, Mark's comment was, I never would have had the balls to get rid of that stuff. But now that he sees it and he's passed it around, it's a whole different attitude. Once I'm at the location, I can jump in here. I mark off the items. I can make a call in case I have to, you know, in case Jennifer McCarran has the door locked or something like that. I have that information available. So that's an idea. These last two apps are pretty polished. This thing here, this one here, and the traceability one. They're pretty high end in terms of fit and finish. Just like in FileMaker, when we first started designing FileMaker stuff, it looks like this. Right? We just plop the layouts on there, and that's probably what everybody's first FileMaker apps were. So I'm going to start with demonstrating a BetterForms app, and we'll start kind of in the same place, and then you can kind of extrapolate from your experience in FileMaker where we can go with that. All right, does that make sense so far? Does anybody have any questions? Okay, so I have a really, really simple page, and what we'll do is we'll build something up, and maybe then you can pull it up on your computers there, and we'll submit some information and watch it come in. That'll be kind of cool because there's a whole bunch of people on the call. So, all right. So this is a really simple page. It's got two fields, just like a FileMaker layout. It's got two fields. I have two fields, and I want to maybe gather some information. I want to gather all the feedback from how our presentation was. So let's do that. BetterForms is a cloud-based editor, so we have an online application. And this is it here. We have a really, really good support group, excellent Slack community. We have probably about 50 or so hours of training in UI design, UX, FileMaker techniques, and things like that as well, and our documentation. I'm going to go to our pages section. Pages are like layouts in FileMaker. And I have a page called Job Application, which happens to be this one right here. And what I want to do is I want to add on some fields onto this. Right now, I have a few fields, and we edit most of our information through JSON. That gives us a ton of flexibility. So I have one field here, and I have some keys in my JSON object here. One of them is the label, first name, another label called last name. I want to add an email address. So I'm going to search my snippet library for email. Got to spell it right. There we go. And I'm just going to copy that to my clipboard, and I'm going to paste this in here. And I'm done. I'm going to hit Command S to save. I'm going to refresh my page. And there's my email field. So now we're starting to build this page out. I want to add a place for comments, right? Because we want to gather some comments. We say, hey, how did you do that? I don't have a field called comments, but we have a field called text area, which is like a taller input box. And I'm just going to save that there. And that's going to actually come up on a funny spot on the screen here. So let's have a look at that. And it's kind of sitting over here, and you say, well, why is it sitting over here? It's because BetterForms out of the box, everything is responsive. So that means as I move this screen down, it moves into the right spot. And Fred had mentioned, you try to keep the minimum standard, like a cheap kind of old ghetto Android phone would be, let's say, 320 pixels wide. So that's a little bit smaller than the browser is letting me go right here, right now. But I need to be able to support that. So the problem here in terms of flowing, and we're going to start to see this in later versions of FileMaker eventually, that objects float up and to the left here, or at least that's how I have them designed right now. So effectively what I want to do is I want to put my cursor right here, and I want to hit enter and move this down to the next line. If this was a word processor and this is a block of text, I would move that down. So in order to do that, I'm going to put a clearing element. So I'm just going to search for one of these clear to the rest of the line. And I'm going to place that element right inside, right in between there. And let's have a look here again. Let's refresh this. And there we go. That's better. So everything's working great. Pretty good. We still need some kind of an action. So we need to do something with this. We got the ability to fill it out so far. My browser recognizes these fields, which is really, really important because of things like passwords, things like name, first name, last name, the email. So it already automatically does that because it's a real web application, right? It's not a representation of a web app. It's a true web app. And so let's go through and let's add a button here. I'm going to put one more of these. Elements right in here. More of these clearing ones, and I am going to search for a button. And so I'm going to grab a button. We have a bunch of different ones here, and we can style these any way we want. And I'm going to place a button on here. It says push me for the title, and I'm going to say rate presenter, something like that. Presenter. Right, presentation. Maybe we should have said that. Okay, so there we go. It's not too bad there. Okay.
Charles, you better not be doing this and having a live version where people can rate the previous presenter.
Yeah, that's okay. We're going to go for it. We're going to go for it. You can pull this up, and you can, if you guys want to do the play at home game, it's just demo.fmbetterforms.com. All right. Maybe what we can do, somebody can paste that in the link, and you can keep reloading this and see it live on your machine there, because it is live, right? So demo.fmbetterforms.com. You don't have to worry about the end part here. All right. So I added a button, but the button's not doing anything right now, right? So click, 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 click. Nothing's happening. FileMaker. If we go into FileMaker here, and I add a button, and I draw a nice big ugly button here because I have a button overload. Every button has an action. And that action can run a single step or multiple steps, basically, right? BetterForms is almost exactly the same. Let me undo this. And let's wait till that catches up. There we go. All right. Well, we'll get to it in a second. That's okay. So every button needs to have some kind of an action. So we have an actions key right down here. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so we can see. Yeah, too big. There we go. All right, so we have an action. So we want to do some kind of an action. BetterForms has maybe about 20 or 30 actions. And actions are things like navigate and go to a different page or a different layout. Run a script in FileMaker, which is what we're going to do. Show an alert, show a toaster, show another card window, and so on. So we can do all of those things. So the button or the action that I want is a hook script. A hook is a different concept of a script. They're slightly different than we typically do in FileMaker. Normally, our scripts are linear, and they don't usually intercept other things in FileMaker. What that means is I click a button, and I say, create new invoice. That button goes to a layout, creates a new record. Maybe it populates a couple fields with some default information, and it's done, right? So that's a very linear path. In BetterForms, we're going to call a script in FileMaker. The FileMaker is going to mutate some data within that script, or it's going to do some action. And then that script is going to return back to BetterForms with its results. So that's why we call it a hook. It's really the same script. It's just that the application is a little different. And I have one called utility hook here. So that's the one I want. I'm going to paste that in here. And I'm going to say hit save. Okay. Let me go back over to my FileMaker app that I moved off. Now, we're all done with our design on the page so far. Okay, everything's done here. We're ready to capture some data back. Over on the FileMaker side, we've done a few other things that I've done sort of ahead of time. I went to my servers page, I created a new server, and I've added the connection to my server. And I've also gone through, I've also gone into my FileMaker application, and I've pasted some custom functions. Right? These custom functions mostly are JSON manipulation tools that make it easier for us to do a lot of the things we need to do that FileMaker doesn't have natively. And I've also pasted some script steps in here. So let's have a look at those. I've pasted a folder of scripts, and these are like scaffolding scripts. They're relatively empty scripts, and that's what BetterForms is going to communicate with. One of the things that makes building a web app different from, in BetterForms, from a programming paradigm, different than building a regular web app, is we have a true separation of concerns, right? FileMaker, it's a full stack development environment. So your UI, your view basically is the layout. And then when I click into here, I'm directly connecting to the data model, to the model, and the controller is whatever logic happens around that. Sometimes it's on it's a calculation engine, sometimes it's in the scripts, but it's directly coupled. Everything is very, very tightly coupled in FileMaker. And that is awesome for when you're beginning something, but it's really becomes a little bit more cumbersome when you're building bigger and bigger applications, because you know your table occurrence graph grows ginormously. With BetterForms apps, we don't generally do that as much because we don't have to worry about the UI for the workflow that's concerning the web. So what that means is I have just some scripts here, and these scripts are going to be taking care of the concern of that layout. So I have this layout and this button, and I want this folder of scripts to be concerned with that. Within this folder of scripts, I have a script called onUtility, which is the one that utility hook, that general script hook call is going to run. So if this was FileMaker, just to get a hello world, we do something like show custom dialog, right? SCD, and I'd show this custom dialog. But since it's not quite FileMaker, we do it almost the same. We're going to interact with some global variables, and one of the variables is called $BF actions. And all of the variables that we interact with in BetterForms have the same naming convention. Oops. And we have a custom function that's going to generate a little bit of JSON, and it's called modal. It's called BF action show modal. You can think of this as being exactly the same as show custom dialog. I don't need a title. Type is the icon type. I'm going to say success. That's going to give a little animated checkbox, release some endorphins in the user, and they'll feel like they've accomplished something, and say thank you. Thank you, I think, for your rating. Yeah, something like that. Theme, you can go light and dark and a few other things. I'm gonna go light because all the cool kids are going dark theme. And options, I don't need any additional buttons and all kinds of other stuff like that. So that's it. Now really what's happening here, just to show you what's really going on. This is purely a custom function. If we look under and see what it does. And if I was to just show you what's happening in there, you can see that it's strictly building an object, right? It's a simple object. It's actually an array, and it's an array of an instruction, and it's going to pass that instruction from FileMaker back over. Why this is important is FileMaker is deciding what to show and when to show it, not the web app itself. If you've done any traditional web publishing, like say PHP or anything, even React or Vue or anything like that, you know that you have two sets of business logic, really three code bases. You have the very front end code, that's your browser stuff. You have a server of some kind of code, and then you have the FileMaker code, right? We're eliminating, I gotta make sure I put down the right finger. We're eliminating that middle chunk of code here, pure front end and back end. So let's see, I just want a quick review, BF actions, there we go, we're done there. Let's hit save there. Let's refresh our page because I don't know if I made any changes on it or not. And let's see, and ta-da. Okay, thank you, I think, for your rating, right? Give it a try at home already and make sure it's working for you, should be, right? Now, so we got some basic stuff here. We got a basic communication between FileMaker and your web app. And again, the real important takeaway is the logic for this display came from FileMaker. So that means I can show different modals. I can navigate them. I can do everything that we can do in FileMaker, which we'd normally do with the FileMaker UI. We can control the backend, or sorry, control the website. So now let's go and let's do some real traditional FileMaker. Go to layout. I'm going to go really fast here. And if you have any questions, jump right in. The layout is called, I have a layout over here called applications. And we're going to do new record. And we're going to set field, And the field I'm going to set is going to be name first. Now, let's talk about the data here a little bit. This is a little bit of a paradigm difference or a subtle difference for most FileMaker developers. When we're developing here, we're always thinking about this field. It kind of goes, it's kind of circular. I'm in a field, which is on a layout, which is on a table occurrence, which is connected to a table, which is connected to a record, which is connected to a field. So there's this full integration here. In BetterForms and most web applications, let me just cheat to fill this out. Hello. There we go. I have some developer tools turned on the bottom here. So this is the equivalent of FileMaker's inspector or the developer data viewer. And you can see here that there's a data object. We call it the model. That's an industry term for reactive interfaces. The data model, or if you heard of model view controller, it's the same sort of thing. This is the model part, the data. And it has a few keys: name first, name last, email, objectives. And there's all my data. It has nothing to do with the layout. It has nothing to do with the field names in FileMaker. It's just pure data. Okay. So that data comes in and that shows up in my script over here. There we go. It shows up in a global variable. Oops, let's do this. It shows up in a global variable called $BF model. Now it's an object. So that means if it's an object, I got to do JSON get element. Out of that object, I need to get that particular key. Let's move some stuff over here. I need to get the name first key. If I make a typo, let me know, please. Or just leave me struggle. See how well my debugging skills are. All right, so I picked that name first out of the model. Let me do the same thing for the other fields, name last. Now, if you've name last, there we go. And we have, what else do we have? Email and comments, I think, right? Is that right? Email. And this is a real common use case, you know, email, that you need to gather some information from a client and you just need a front end and you want to send an email out and you're sending it out to 50,000 people. And if you have a web direct license, you can only have maybe say 5 people because you have a small office or something like that. So right away, people hit the link, this thing doesn't work. They're never going to do it again. So I have a field called comments here, but I think it's called objectives over here. So they don't have to actually match, but. There we go. I think that's good. So this is running on server, right? So it's running in the FileMaker script engine. So because of that, we have to explicitly commit. So we're going to commit the record. So let's have a quick code review. We go to layout, new record, name first, name last, email, comments, name first, name last, email, comments. We're looking objectives. We're looking pretty good there. Okay. Don't do it yet. If you're doing this at home, let me do it. Actually, you know what? Let's see if it works. So let's try. So we go, Charles, what is your objectives? Presenter is a nice guy and gives great, careful support. There. All right, let's see here. So I have a field. I'm going to blow out this record. Let's see if I've made maybe I save everything. I think so. I think we're good. All right, thank you for your support. And ta-da, there we go. Now we have, oh yeah, keep going. Let's go, bring it on. I see somebody else is right in there. Bruce is in there. There we go. We got another one. See, they're coming in 4 records, 5 records, right? 7 records now. Oh, look at 11 plus. Thank you very much, right? See, the reason I'm doing this demonstration is because I'm very insecure and I need all of these feedback things. Cool, right? Pure genius. Looks great and easy. All right, so there we go. So we just gathered 8 records. We built a little simple application. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions about it so far? Just jump right in. It takes a second sometimes because you're probably speaking and you forgot to unmute. Let's carry this on a little bit because we got lots of time. Let's build this out to be a little bit more exciting. Typically, a very typical use case is you send somebody a link, a smart link, and you need to, in an email, and you want to have that user gather some information, surface some information, or something along those lines. Oh, we've got 13 comments now. That's great coming in, right? Say, pretty nifty, huh? And it's all in FileMaker. That's a cool thing. We built that in like 12 minutes. So typical use cases, you want to send them a smart link. You want to put some kind of query like ID equals something unique in here. And when they hit that unique link, we want to say, yes, you're the right person, or no, you're not really a person and you can't use this, right? Or maybe we want to surface some information. We can do all of that kind of stuff in BetterForms really, really easy. This is called a query parameter, this thing up here. And query parameters get surfaced. So maybe what I want to do is when this page first loads, maybe I want to grab some information from my database and display it. And then once I've displayed that information, the other person would review that, right? So it's a little bit different. Maybe I send them out a link and I want to see a picture of Charles or a picture of Fred or a picture of anybody else and say, here's the presenter, just to refresh you. And we got that. We're up to 20. We're up to 20 now. Look at that. There's probably some duplicates in there. By the way, we're not doing anything after this. I think we should do something after this too, right? This doesn't make sense because I hit submit and there I go. I made this nice submission. There's 21 records there, but that's really bad workflow. So really what we need to do is we need to do another action. We need to take the user away from here. The other day I was experimenting with some modular components, and I built a really simple, it's just a bogus marketing website in BetterForms. And I built it literally in about 4 minutes. And I can show you later if we have time on how they did that. But I want to navigate the user to somewhere else. So in FileMaker, I'd say go to layout and go to the marketing page. So we call it a path. And there's a BetterForms function called setActionPath. And it's pretty simple. We just put the path in here, marketing. And let's do this. We don't need any special options like opening it up in a new tab or anything like that. And save. And now I have not done anything. You don't have to do anything on the front end. But now when I hit the button, it says, thank you for your submission. And it goes to this marketing page. This page is actually being served by BetterForms, by the way. Right? We would normally not build marketing pages in BetterForms, usually. Right? There's like Wix and all that stuff. It's probably a little bit easier, separation of, do what you do well. But you can super duper do stuff like this really, really easy. And by the way, it's fully responsive. And I think that's wickedly cool. Okay. So let's go and take it another notch. And by the way, if you've got questions, please just jump right in. Okay. I'm going to go back to my other page. There it is there. And I want to throw an ID into that query parameter. So the way we do that is when that page first loads now, if this was FileMaker, I would get some information. I would go to layout, perform find, get the info. I'd be on the record, perform find. Now I'm on the layout. And then I would show that to the user. So in BetterForms, we do the same thing. So I want to go over to my integration tab. And I'm going to enable my on-form request hook. That is the equivalent of on layout load in FileMaker, on layout load script trigger, something like that. And I'm going to hit save there. Now I'm going to go over to my scripts over here, and I have another script called on form request. There's nothing in it right now. There's a little bit of logging at the top, and it exits with a true at the bottom. The reason we exit with true is so you can test if the script ran, so we can do some more error debugging. All right, now, yeah.
You have a question from Elizabeth.
Shoot.
Hi, Carlito. So you're showing us how very fast and facile you can be with BetterForms, and it's obviously true, but it's also your Frankenstein. So you know all the things. Yeah. My question really is, do you have some sort of chart or Babel fish? Because several times during the presentation you said, "Oh, in FileMaker it said this, but we call it model."
Good question. Yeah,
just a little translation one sheet.
Yeah, so translation. We have a lot of videos. We have videos on how to do little techniques. We have videos on big techniques. We have that Flower app it's filmed 1-to-1. You can actually watch me build it, that particular one. I don't have videos from other people, other developers, because we make our own, but that gives a lot of in-depth stuff. Right now, the stuff that we're doing is the equivalent, the FileMakers, imagine you got FileMaker plopped in front and this is all you saw. And they said, hey, can you add a middle name field onto that? It's like, I don't even know how to push Command L. I don't know how to double click on this and change that to middle name. And then the fact that I could now, I'm waiting for FileMaker to catch up, the fact that I could actually add the managed database and all of that stuff. So those are all things that you do have to learn because it's a new platform, right? You're going to be learning a lot more things. You're going to be becoming a Neo with JSON because we use JSON a lot. But don't be afraid of that because I have developers literally have never used anything in JSON, and I check back with them 3 days later, and they're like reading it like Tank from the Matrix, right? They're doing fine because it's not really language; it's a formatting. You learn a lot more about UI because you start to think when you're building an app in BetterForms, you're starting to think like a web app and not like FileMaker. You're not just plopping stuff all over the screen and all kinds of buttons. You're starting to think about workflows because that's the way you do everything in a browser. Everything is a lot more logical when it comes to apps than our FileMaker experience. So that's another thing as well. So our documentation and then training videos and that kind of thing would be your answer there. We can make really, really complex things. I want to send somebody a smart link and pull up. I have a database here. Let me see how we're doing for time. Yeah, not too bad. I have a database here and it's got the people. Where is it? People, browse. And I think I have 1,000 people in here. There we go. Right. So I want to grab some random one. This is Claire Noason, copy. And I want to my goal is that when I send Claire or send somebody an email like this, and I'll paste the link with some of these links, some of these IDs, and you can try it in a second. My goal is when I send them that, I want to load her information up. And now let's go a little bit deeper. I want to make a nice display of her entry for her presentation. And I want to dynamically pull that up and then I can edit the stuff below. So that's my goal. So first of all, I need to turn on my form request. So that calls FileMaker. Then in FileMaker, I need to grab that ID that I passed in. So we're going to do that. So set variable, and it's going to be ID, and we don't need to put a $ in there. And it'll do it automatically, And now the data that comes in from the web for that particular query parameter is called BF query, QUERY. The data comes in a global variable called BF query. And it's a JSON object, so I need to do JSON get element, BF query, and I happen to have called it, where is it? I called it ID, right? There could be multiple query parameters. You can go ampersand. You've all probably done that with different links and different things, connecting things. So I called it ID, and that's it. So now my ID has my ID. And now I need to look it up in FileMaker. Now here's an awesome technique. If you don't buy BetterForms, which is fine, my kids will starve. That's okay. But if you don't, this one thing to take away from today is this technique here. What we have in our database, and some of you may be doing this already, I have a field called as JSON. And what this is in my people table. Come on, there we go. As JSON is a JSON set element, so it's building a JSON object up of all the fields that I care about that are in this table, right? Or in this record. So I got first name, last name, blah, 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 blah. And I can even put related data in there too. So this makes a JSON object of the record, right? So we can grab it really, really easy. So here's how we do that. Set variable, come on, there we go. Person, I like to have semantic names. And, excuse me, we have a custom function, it's called getColumn. Column. There we go. And basically getColumn is an execute SQL wrapper, and it'll return this thing, which is my as JSON. So it returns the whole object when the ID key equals ID. Done. Okay. That's my go-to layout, perform fine, do everything. Now, why is this so beautiful is, first of all, yes, it's using execute SQL. In this case, and out of hundreds of cases I've used, it's pretty performant. Doesn't rely on layouts, so it's a lot less fragile. So somebody else goes and deletes the layout. You don't have this stuff. When you're building, 25% of our users in BetterForms have vertical applications, right? They have a software as a service or some kind of vertical that's monetized. And we're finding that actually the number is growing more because that's kind of our sweet spot. And when you do a technique like this, you increase the security tenfold, because now if it doesn't find that exact ID, it fails gracefully, right? And that's why it's important. So we're going to take that, we're going to do one more set variable, and we're going to go into here, $BF underscore model, just the same place that we pulled that data out of the, when we hit the save button, we're going to put it back in there. So this time it's JSON set element, right? Because I'm setting it into there. And I want to put it into a key called person, and it's person, and it's going to be $person, and the type will be a JSON object. I'm going quick here. Oops, that was my bad. There we go. All right, tighten that up a little bit. There we go. All right, so let's have a look. BF model, we grabbed the key called, or we took the object, it's a JSON object, and we stuck it inside, this BF model here, under there. I think we're good now. So now I'm going to pick another one here. Let's grab one of these IDs, and I'm going to stick it up here. And let me do that. And now I'm going to look under the hood. And here's the cool thing. That data from that record is in my browser right now. It's not being displayed, but it's there. Right? So I looked under the hood, I fetched the data, and here it is here. All right. So let's see if I'm going to see if I can do this within a couple minutes, because I want to leave a few minutes for some extra questions and things like that. What I want to do, I have this, I never used to care about UI, and I used to make fun of those people. I'm not going to lie. And because to me, UI wasn't so important, especially when I first started coding. I started learning assembly language on a Z80 microprocessor, and I became an electrical engineer, and we started doing hardware coding of microcontrollers and things like that, which are, they weren't, things like Arduinos, but way before then. And so you never really cared because the only UI was text, right? So I never really had this appreciation for this stuff. But lately, for the past couple of years, since working with a couple of designers, we have a couple of designers that consult with BetterForms, Fred being one of them. I really, really appreciate it. Even though I'm not good at it, I really, really have some appreciation for it. And I really have this fetish for cards, right? Because I think cards are just so cool, card modals. And I see all these cards, and this thing has a whole bunch of different cards. There's like this is just a site with a whole bunch of card layouts, and I think they're all kind of nifty. And I like this one here, this user card, because I think this looks kind of cool, right? And I want to put that information in because that's going to be like my placard for the for my talk. So I'm just literally going to grab the code from this, right? I don't have to know about what any of this stuff is. I'm just going to grab the code. That's it. Actually, before I do that, I need a place to put it. So let's go back over to our page builder, and let me grab an HTML block. This is for people who want to get a little bit more advanced now. I just want to show you that you can do stuff like this. BetterForms gives you the ability to do full JavaScript programming, full HTML if you really want to. Or you can just dabble a little bit. So I'm going to take this thing here, copy, and we'll go, let's clean up my desktop because that'll less mental load there. And we're going to paste it in here. And I'm going to go paste. Okay, hit save, hit save. Go to here. Hit reload. Now it's not going to be dynamic yet, right? Because I didn't wire it up. Excuse me. But this is getting pretty cool now. Now it's becoming kind of powerful. Now I want to take this information in here. I want to take, what is the person's name? Roderick. That doesn't look like a Roderick. Roderick, and they're under a key called person. So it's the model.person.Roderick, and I want to change this person's name here. So let's do that. I just want to show you how you can get in deeper, okay? So don't think that this is the norm for BetterForms, but this is if you want to build something more complex. So I have Patterson here. So we have a built-in HTML editor, Patterson. In FileMaker, how would you do this? You would put those double angle braces and do a merge, some kind of a merge field, merge variable. BetterForms, double curly braces, right? A merge model dot, model dot was a person dot name first. right? And there's two of them. I'm just going to copy this, Command-Shift-D, because it's an editor, to duplicate that, put a space in between, and this is name last. Okay. Let's save that. Let's save that. Let me go back to here, grab this string for the clipboard, copy and refresh this. And ta-da, this is dynamic now. Now, if you've ever done any, and I don't care what environment, if you've connected any kind of front end to FileMaker, there's no way you can do that quick, right? I know because I've worked for the best. I worked for Steve Winter for a year. I consider him probably the best UI guy in FileMaker, web publishing guy in the world, to my knowledge. And you can't build something this fast, right? All right, let's grab another one. Let's see if it's working. Paste, enter, and there's Jackie Yaxley. You know, I got 1,000 people, and I've picked her about 4 times in the past 2 months. It's really bizarre. So that is an example of building something. Now we can make this stuff all dynamic. All of this stuff can come from FileMaker. I can change this image. I have an image thing in here, but we're going to be a little bit tight for time because I want to cover one more thing here. But does that make sense now? How you can build stuff? You know, can you see yourself using something like that? Pretty. I think it's pretty. I wouldn't want to say straightforward, but I think because I went and did some advanced things here. But as far as the working with JSON, everybody does already. And if not, you need to anyway. Responsive layouts, we have to have different screen sizes. That's the bottom line. So we have to be able to support that kind of stuff. And the rest of it is just pure FileMaker.
You got one question here. What's the URL on Tailwind for the...
That was, just Google Tailwind components. That was. BetterForms can use a number of different CSS architectures, and the one I have installed and with my demo here is Tailwinds. Tailwind's pretty cool. It just allows you to desemantically design elements and shapes and stuff, and you can like make stuff really, really easily. So it's Tailwind Components, I think, something like that. Yeah, tailwindcomponents.com.
Okay, so we have a question from Ralph.
Charles, this is really super impressive stuff. And I can certainly see myself using this. There's one question I have. You have a tab on your website called pricing, except there's nothing on it about
Correct. That's right. We had pricing on for one time, and we made 0 sales. Believe it or not. So one of the things, here's a really interesting thing. When you're building a software as a service, I didn't know a lot about the industry, but that's all I spend time learning about now. You literally have to retune your pricing and your offering every 3 months. Like if you go to Dropbox and have a look at the pricing, take a snapshot, 3 months later, I guarantee it'll be different, right? And it'll be subtly different, always tweaking things. So we do the same thing. So let's talk about pricing. The BetterForms comes in three licensing models: the citizen developer, pro developer, and the vertical or SaaS. The pro developer and vertical or SaaS are almost the same, but just different use cases. So we'll start with the citizen developer. Citizen developer is basically slightly limited in the sense that you can build 20 pages for whatever use case. So it's a good thing for getting started. You say, well, 20 pages, what? You know, my FileMaker layout has 400 layouts. Yeah, but a web app like Fred's app, that MMBL app, uses 2 pages, believe it or not. There's only 2 forms on that page. And all this stuff is just navigating between different views, kind of like using different tabs or panels. This editor that I've been using today, this thing here, that I set my servers up, this is an application 100% built in BetterForms. It's an app exactly the same as everybody else's apps. It just happens to be the one that we use for editing, right? So we sort of eat our own dog food. This only has 26 pages in it at the moment. So that's an entire application that serves, you know, hundreds of developers and so on. So this is pretty generous in the sense of how that works. And that is $599 for the citizen developer. It's a yearly license, yearly subscription fee. We take care of the high availability infrastructure, and you have to supply your own FileMaker server. We have a pro developer plan, and the pro developer plan is designed for dev houses, development houses, and basically developers that are building a lot more stuff and want to have multiple applications. I need a customer portal, I need a staff portal, and then I need a friend from my cousin's got a wedding and I want to whip up something for him and all that kind of stuff. All of that sits under one account, and unlimited pages, unlimited users. We don't charge by bandwidth or user. You can run as much stuff through our servers as you want. Our biggest user has about 4,000 people, and our smallest has like 2 or 3. So this is $1,750 per year, which is approximately $149 per month. So you can think of $49 a month, $149 for this one. And then our vertical SaaS is a software as a service license. So if you have an application that the monetization of the application is a primary source of income for the business, that's what we consider a vertical. Or that application is the software, so you're selling that software in some fashion, that fits under a vertical as well. Or it fits under a SaaS. Or if the vertical is, if the application is your business, then it's a vertical. So that is the same price, but it's one of. You can only use it for one of those things. But that's fine, because somebody like the flower shop, he can use one license for his entire company. And this is, again, is $1,750 per year, or $149 per month.
Thank you. Cool.
Okay, Dave, you're up.
Yeah, this is Dave, and just a little bit on the functionality on the back end. You went really fast when you showed those great functions.
Yeah.
Just to see a little bit more of those functions. You don't have to do anything.
You know what you can do is you can download our helper file that has them all in there, right? Go to our website and just drop there's a contact information, and just say you're looking for a link to the helper file, and it has them all in there, and it puts them on the clipboard for you and installs them all for you there.
Okay, great. Thanks.
All right. There's about 40 or 50 in there. So there's about half a dozen or a dozen or so BetterForms ones, but the rest of them are designed for JSON manipulation and stuff like that.
Thank you. There's also
a number of videos under our Getting Started section, where we have a video library, and the videos here, they are here. There in this Getting Started, there's some stuff on how to prepare data from FileMaker here. Preparing data for BetterForms, but it's really about just gathering data in FileMaker, working with JSON, because I see so many developers are doing it so hard, and it can be so elegant. Like, I use 3 lines to find a record, and you can put any URL in that title bar, and if it fails, if you've got the wrong ID, it doesn't come up with some wrong record or anything like that. 3 lines, high security, in the sense of, I didn't even add anything else around it, just by the architecture. Right? So there's a big difference there. It's really easy in BetterForms to build secure apps that way because of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. If you think about security, actually, this is something we're going to be talking next week in our Friday Live meetup group on an authorization module. It's a little different approach than typical FileMaker for managing like user accounts and that kind of stuff, and what privilege sets, authorization sets. But when you're separating the front end from the back end, it's the equivalent of trying to control shoplifting in a grocery store or a Walmart compared to a drive-through, right? Really, really easy to control shoplifting through a drive-through. You just have to watch that one employee, and that's it. In a Walmart, you need hundreds of cameras, right? And that's the same principle in BetterForms. Small surface area, so you reduce the attack vectors.
Charles, we have a question from Kimberly.
Mm-hmm.
Kimberly, you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Hey there.
Hey.
I just want to check if our FileMaker server is behind a firewall, which means outside systems can't call in, is this something that would be accessible if our FileMaker system could call out?
Not if it can call out, but what you do, we have one client and they do hard drive recovery, for example. So there could be like government drives and stuff like that. So they have a really secure environment. That security is really top for them. What they did is they created an endpoint with, they had to do a little bit of extra work because of their unique use case. They wanted to make sure that opening, that penetration was 100% controlled by them. So they created an external endpoint with AWS Lambda function, and BetterForms talks to that, and that tunnels through their firewall in a secure fashion to their FileMaker database. And in their case, they actually have a separate FileMaker database as well for an added layer of security.
Okay, thanks.
So yes, you can do that, but you can't, not about calling out. It's about having just a secure port.
Cool, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dave, do you have another question?
Yeah, sorry, real quick. What about the offline progressive web app functions? Is there anything like that?
No, there isn't. BetterForms, we have started development of some client-side caching, and that's designed for a few things. It gives us a lot of optimization, reduced bandwidth, PWA that you launch it and the data is already there. Imagine Fred's basketball app, you launch it, the data's there, even if you have no data connection. But when it comes to offline stuff, as soon as you make an application offline, if you're just surfacing the data, that's easy, right? Where it gets tricky is the minute you have to save some data, because now you're adding business logic. But wait a minute, I got all my business logic when I save data and all the stuff that's supposed to do, all the FileMaker-y stuff that happens in the background, that's sitting in these scripts over here. So now I'm replicating that on the offline. So really and truly, you have to say, what is my offline application and what do I use? And it turns out for the thousands of users that we have, that it's not as important as people think it is. Oh, I need it offline. But almost all the time you're online, especially on mobile devices. So, I mean, there are use cases. We do have an enterprise version coming out of BetterForms that's kind of standalone, sort of like an offline, like for like cruise ships and that kind of thing. And that's a standalone. That's a little bit more expensive. It's about 2.5 times our regular price, roughly. But that's fully standalone. You still develop in the cloud, but you publish it to your local environment. A little bit different application.
Okay, thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Okay, Michael, you're up.
Okay, one question. Will this do signature capture?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's add it real quick here while I'm talking. And let's go to the next question while I do this.
Okay, Ken?
Yes, I was just wondering, I'm not sure if I missed it or not, but what about pop-ups? Can you easily do pop-up?
Card modals, yeah. We did actually show in some of those demos, you can do card modal. So the card is just another page, just kind of like FileMaker, right? It's another page. All right, signature capture is finished.
And does the signature capture work?
Comes into your script as base 64.
Okay. And
here we go here. Boom, boom. I have to pick it out of the field, of course, but I'm done.
Okay.
Pretty cool, huh?
And that works on web or iOS?
Works on anything that has a browser.
And it'll save that as base 64?
In this case, yeah.
Awesome.
You bet. You want to add a payment gateway, it's equally as fast. Put a Stripe payment gateway on there. Equally as fast.
Okay.
You got to do a little bit of work in the back end, of course, but.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, another question from Steve. Steve, unmute yourself and ask the question. Steve, are you there? Steve Solani? I think Steve's having a little trouble figuring out how to...
maybe when he gets it sorted out, he can jump in. I'm going to make this picture dynamic while we're standing here too. Model.person.photo. Photo? That's photo, yeah. There we go.
Okay, I think I have it now.
Hey, how you doing?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I have sort of a general question. I want to try to understand what benefits that your platform provides as opposed to simply building a website and serving it with WebDirect.
All right. Well, if you're serving it from WebDirect, you're not building a website, you're using WebDirect, just to clarify that. So the biggest thing is, first of all, if you guys would to submit all of this stuff through WebDirect, I would already run out of my licenses, right? If I would say, okay, guys, I'm going to give away a free BetterForms t-shirt, jump on right now and leave your reviews. And I emptied this out and I'm going to take the 5th one. I've already blown out my WebDirect licenses right there, just doing that in this one little call. Right? What happens if I go on MailChimp and I send that thing out to 50,000 users all at the same time over the course of 10 minutes and they all click on that? What's going to happen? Right? They're going to have a really crummy experience. So that's the biggest thing, scalability. Right? The next thing over WebDirect is not responsive. I can't use this display on my phone, but here I can. Right? I haven't done anything to even tweak it up a little bit, but you know.
You can change the layouts dynamically in WebDirect based on what somebody's logging in with.
Yeah, they can. Okay, can you do this in WebDirect? If they're logging in, you can't. Now they have to re-log in again. Can I go back on a web page? Oops, and go, I don't have my back button doesn't have one. But if I navigated, Can I do that? So those are all, there's a lot of other those things as well. Now, again, WebDirect does absolutely have its practical purposes. If I want to take this thing here and just make it accessible and somebody can do it, perfect, it's done. If I have software as a service, I cannot use WebDirect, not practically. Resources on the back end is another thing. FileMaker server needs to be like 1/10 of the size. Does not need to be nearly as powerful because the interactions are milliseconds, not continuous. So that's another factor as well. And in all honesty, cost.
People who are running FileMaker servers and that are talking to your platform are still paying for the data API. Is that correct? So there still are some limitations.
Yeah, BetterForms can connect it to the XML and the data API. But the data amount is relatively light. Like we even looked at it for our editor, and we have, right now, it's not on the right screen, but right now there were like 20 something FileMaker developers using BetterForms a few minutes ago. And even for that, like a relatively, I think it doesn't even breach the 5 user limit for the year. It's pretty small. So it's pretty, people, when they heard about FileMaker's data API being monetized, you got a lot of people who push back, but the reality is chances are you're not using it, and you can optimize your system to reduce data as well.
Okay, so your point is that you'll run into, if you're using WebDirect, you'll run into a limitation on users much more quickly than you will run into a problem of cost using the data.
Correct.
Through.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, we got a question from Ward.
Hey, Charles. Thank you for the presentation. Can you live update, like in a chat window? Like Node.js?
Yeah. So BetterForms has the infrastructure to do, we use sockets to connect. So what he's asking is, can we have push-pull interaction? Currently, with our current version of software, no, but it's actually built into our framework. So it's just not surfaced in the UI at the moment. And we haven't had a huge need for it, to be honest with you. So we pick and choose. I mean, like any startup, you pick and choose the features that users need, right? They needed to have the ability to have high customization. They wanted the ability to scale better and these kinds of things. So we focus on those ones rather than the pushing of data. But I can show you, I can't show you because it's proprietary. I can't, if you private call me, I can show you some examples of that kind of stuff.
So it can work, but it's a little workaround.
There's different ways of doing it. Yeah. One of them is like a polling type system where your front end just pings the back end and says, hey, every 5 or 10 seconds. Like some people do that for report generation because reports are really expensive on the server. So they maybe have some kind of report robot or something that queues them up. And then they check, hey, is my report ready? And if it is ready, then it changes the front end. That's a common use case.
Right. Yeah, polling. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Charles, we have one last question from John Maxwell. I'll read it for him because he doesn't have a microphone. For security purposes, I assume that you still have to have separate database files for each client.
Here's the beauty of this. Okay, this is a really good question. Lots of different architectures in terms of typically, there's typically three or so. Here we go. This is kind of a crummy picture. I'm going to see if I can blow it up a little bit. Great figures. Yeah. Here we're gonna do this. See if they can do that. So I'm going a little quick here. 3 typical architectures for building multi-tenant applications, right? The first one is what we do in FileMaker. That's when we have, and this is a little bit hard to see. I'll see if I can go a little bit bigger here. The first one is when you have single backend database, single application of whatever it is. Typically, you don't even have these 2 are connected in FileMaker, and you just serve that out. The next one is a single front end and the multiple backends. So you have a single front end application, and then you have separate databases. Now, this is where BetterForms, it sits at this layer here, right? And BetterForms works with both of these architectures extremely well. And here's why. So the first one, you can separate your data. And remember I was saying that when you're trying to control security, like shoplifting in a grocery store, it's really, really hard. You can always go here, you can go here, and so on, and people can shoplift really, really easily. But with BetterForms, the control, the data is coming into a script. You have control over that script. BetterForms is not talking to your tables like a traditional web app. It's strictly talking to scripts. So that means in my script, whatever I have decided in here to fetch this person's data, right? I can add my control logic in here, you know, whatever my business logic is, right? My logic to control the person. That's kind of really bad typing there. I can add that ahead of my script and I can control that environment. They can't accidentally go into it. Like a FileMaker app's really hard to lock down, right? Like this is a FileMaker app. It's connected to a server. If I could hack my computer, I could have access to everything, no matter what the developer did. Because that information, this is a solid connection to that server. With the right credentials, I can hack in, right? So if I even manage to, maybe some people just hide this stuff and they hide that and then change the custom layouts and all this stuff. The minute you make one mistake in there, your whole database is exposed. It's not like that with BetterForms because we're not taking that programming paradigm. So that's, sorry, let me go back to this picture here. So that's why you can handle any of these architectures. You can have a single front end and it can dynamically connect to your different databases based on the URL. And you're still having that same, in my case, that little survey feedback form. You're still having that same form, but it can go into different clients' databases all seamlessly, right? You can bifurcate your workflow into any, with any mechanism you want that way. Very, very flexible. Same thing as a single tenant, and that's the holy grail of multi-tenant apps, single backend database. People get a little bit scared about that, but it's so much easier to manage, and it's super secure when you separate the concerns and everything is coming in a very controlled manner. So I hope that answers your question.
Great. Thanks, Charles.
You're welcome.
We're 15 minutes over now, so I think it's time to wrap up the meeting. So I really appreciate you guys presenting it. That went really well. I'll keep the meeting up for another 20, 30 minutes. If anybody wants to just hang out and chat, feel free to unmute yourself. And if we have any new members, I don't know that we do, but if we have any new members, you might want to introduce yourself.
I wanted to say something. Since we're not meeting at BRZ is losing the support that we usually give them, which is generally a couple $100 per month. You might consider going to BRZ's website, which is brsee.org, and contributing there. They have an online contribution form that you can fill out. So just keep them in your mind, even though we're not there these months.
Thanks, Lynn.